praise God. I was thinking of, there's a historical precedent for this as well. Not a lot of people know that Jonathan Edwards had a big interest in insects and outdoors and just studying the creation as well. But it was fueled by that really robust theology, a high view of God, and recognition that everything is the product of his decree, and that he has created and sustained all his creation. He's faithful to even his creation, which is just amazing. Not just us as humans in his image, but also the other creatures, which is just awesome. But
Yeah.
transitioning a little
Yeah.
bit, I do want to make sure that that everyone that's listening to this is on the same page when we're speaking of outdoor education. So if we were to talk about outdoor education, your passion for it, kind of just begin the conversation there. I'm curious, what would your definition of outdoor education be?
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And maybe we've lost people up to this point that we keep talking about outdoor education, but it is an entire field. A lot of people don't even realize it's there. It's an entire field, and it's just that, is as it sounds. It's education that takes place outdoors, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that's going to play out differently through different schools. I'll talk to you a little bit about how I'm going to structure Cedarwood, but the idea is, most of outdoor education has some emphasis on wilderness skills, environmental awareness, getting kids outside and engaged with the outdoors and having time away from the screens and whatnot. And it is an incredible platform for spiritual growth when done right.
Mm-hmm.
Outdoor education has just a whole host of opportunities to meditate on scripture and pray intentionally and appreciate God's glory and um, understand different seasons of life. Learning contentment. There's so many ways that when outdoor education is done correctly, spiritual growth occurs. And I like to tell parents too, there's a whole host of basic life skills that are also instilled in kids as they're engaging with the outdoors, right? There is, teamwork and collaboration. There's adventure and exploration and discovery and learning how to behold something and, risk management and assessment. There's um, goal setting and achievement. There's physical fitness. There's so many things, competitiveness, when we're playing fun games and whatnot.
Yeah.
There's so many just basic life skills, problem solving, thinking analytically. I talked about the nuances with birding, or maybe it's a track in the mud. There's just so many things that you're training your brain and your life and your character. All of that's being refined and honed through outdoor education when it's done well. So let's just get a little more specific, I suppose, because we're still kind of speaking broadly.
Mm-hmm.
I define outdoor education within four broad categories. These are going to be the four pillars that make up Cedarwood Outdoor School. So there's wilderness survival, there's homesteading, there's herbalism, and then there's creation studies. And so within wilderness survival, we have things like firecraft, and we have things like knife craft and shelter construction and navigation and knots and rope work, hunting and gathering. All of those things are within wilderness survival. Homesteading then moves again from the more of the survival side to the sustainability side, and you have raising animals and gardening and waste management and renewable resources and food preservation and woodworking and blacksmithing and all of those types of skills that take place on a homestead. And then herbalism is one where we emphasize plant identification, so proper botanical skills and plant ID, plant extraction, so the whole medicine making process. How do you make tinctures and oils and salves and plasters and poultices and all of those types of things, and learning constituent theory. You have plant administration then, of how do you actually apply these things in the field or in a actual over a real ailment. How do you get the herbs to the tissue? Then you have setting up an herbal first aid kit we teach as well. And then there's setting up a home apothecary. And maybe that's just, a mom wanting to have a small apothecary at home to deal with the cuts and scrapes and the bumps and bruises of the kids. Or maybe it's, someone that wants to have an entire apothecary to serve the church or the local community, or maybe it's a commercial business. So how do you actually set up a home apothecary? That's herbalism. And then creation studies is all of the wildlife stuff, right? So it's ornithology, the study of birds. It's entomology, it's the study of insects. It's herpetology, the study of reptiles and amphibians. It's mammalogy, the study of mammals. And then there's also wildlife tracking, right? So the studying the signs that animals leave behind, whether that's a footprint in the mud or the sand or scat or rubs on a tree, whatever it might be. That's all wildlife tracking. And so that's how I kind of think of the specific skill sets within those four broad categories. There's wilderness survival, homesteading, herbalism, and creation studies. And what I find really fun about it is that if you give the bug to someone in one area, it just it bleeds out into so many other areas, and all of the outdoor skills fit neatly within different categories. So for example, when I first learned the top 10 knots that a woodsman should know, the classic bowline knot, the fisherman knot, the trucker's hitch, and so on, I loved it. I loved it. And then I was like, okay, I need to go on and learn another 10 knots. So I did. And then I learned another 10 knots. And then I got to thinking, okay, what else can I do with knots and paracord? Well, I started a little side business making paracord bracelets where I would weave different, stitching of bracelets with different colors based on people's favorite sports teams or whatever, school colors. So I would make paracord bracelets. And then I said, okay, well, wait a minute, we can build this out and we could make paracord belts. Or, I could make, a paracord gunsling. Let's go bigger. I made paracord hammocks. How cool is
Mm,
that? And then I'm
yeah.
like, okay, I really am into this. I want to learn more about how I can work with rope. Bank line. So I learned all the things I could do with bank line. I started learning how to make gill nets. My wife can attest that I had basically a permanent ridge line between two cedar trees in the backyard of our Woodinville home. That anytime I just needed to work with my hands or I had a lot on my mind, it was therapeutic. I'd go out, I'd carve a net needle and a mesh gauge, and I'd use bank line to just weave together a, a, a gill net or a dip net or
Mm,
whatever I wanted to build that day. And then I got to thinking, okay, what else have I not explored with rope and things? Well, there's the whole world of yarn. And I said, okay, this might not be the most manly thing to do, but I'm going to master knitting. So I learned how to knit.
mm,
And then once I
mm,
opened that door, it was like, okay, wait a minute. I got really into looming. Looming is really cool. This is a whole nother world. But again, working with yarn, and so I was making hats off of round looms, or I was out in my
mm,
garage. I'd made a bunch of peg looms and made scarves and full blankets off peg looms. And then I said, okay, I want to learn about inkle looming. So I built an inkle loom, and I'm making belts and straps and shoelaces and all of those things.
mm,
And I bring all this up because you can just take a step back for a moment in any of these categories and say, like, for all those things, I fell in love with rope work. I
mm,
loved the concepts of weaving and working with knots and manipulating rope. So those things might look dissimilar, but really I loved the concept of rope work. And that's how a lot of these outdoor skill sets is they fall within these categories, and there's just endless avenues that you can go down within each one. And as you get passionate about one, you see how they're interconnected with other areas, and it's just before you know it, it's just these dominoes that go down. And I already told you how bird watching did that.
mm,
I went from bird watching, a love for birds, to just a general love for wildlife, to wait a minute, I love all things outdoors. I'm going to get into bushcraft, which led to a love for herbalism. It's just, it's these dominoes. And what's so cool when you work with kids is you oftentimes are focusing on one thing, but you can see that you're tipping over this long line of other skill sets and other interests that then come from it.
mm. Man, so the bug got to you then.
The bug got to me bad. And
That's great.
typically with
No.
outdoor skills, you you have sets of things that you're always doing. So every time you go outside, you're refining your firecraft abilities and shelter construction or whatever else. But
Mm,
it's also a field where you're dabbling in a lot of different things for a period of time. It's immersive learning. So, there'd be a period of time, for instance, I recall where I just was obsessed with making primitive bow and arrows.
mm.
And that's all I did for a couple months. And then, yeah, exactly. Get that shoulder up. No. And then all I so you'll do that, and then the next thing you know it, I'm making glue from animal hides, or I'm making a pine needle basket. And you just kind of move from these different skills, you master it, and then you go on to the next thing and you revisit them over time. But that's how a lot of these things work, is you just get passionate about all these different categories, and you're always exploring them and refining them.
Part of me can't help but wonder too if much of this passion that many experience in the outdoor education world and just getting into it and getting the bug, as you have said, is it can be also correlated to sort of a lack of being outdoors and how we were created to be outside.
Yeah.
And in our culture, sometimes it seems like we're headed in a direction, kind of the opposite direction, and kind of along the same lines, a little different. I am curious, and this is sort of the crux of the conversation, is before you and I have talked about redeeming outdoor education and the need to redeem it. We've already established what it is. You've given your pillars for your school. What I'm curious is, what are some of the prevailing worldviews that you've kind of briefly alluded to that have impacted outdoor education outside of what Cedarwood is doing?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that is the heart of this conversation, I think, or at least the thing I want people to take away the most is that
Mm.
outdoor education, one, has incredible potential, but two, it is in deep need of redeeming. And I sense this the more and more I talk with people, especially Christian families, because the trend in culture right now is coming back to wanting kids to be outdoors, right?
Mm.
We want them rolling around in the mud. We want them getting dirty and away from the screens, at least for a period of time. And Christian families sense that, they feel that, especially post COVID. But
Mm.
where do you send your kids? That every school is going to push something. No curriculum is worldview neutral, and that's true in any field, but
Right.
definitely in outdoor education. They're claiming to have uh, a truth. They're claiming to have the right way to look at the outdoors, to shape kids in that process. They're going to push a morality, and you have to ask, is that helpful? Is that beneficial? Sure, my kids might be getting outside, doing fun things, learning fun things, but what are they coming home with, and what is the worldview that's being imparted to them? And in all my years interacting with different outdoor schools, I've identified five prevailing worldviews, and actually, I just wrote a blog post on this, or I'm in the process of
What are
writing
the
it,
five?
so it's fresh on my mind. Yeah, the five. It's worth expanding on here because these ones are all over the place. You'll see it, and the first one is the pantheistic worldview, which is
Mm.
incredibly predominant. It might even be the most common worldview within outdoor education. And the pantheistic worldview, as you probably know, essentially is saying that nature is divine. It's the classic all is God and God is all. And so what ends up
Yeah.
happening is, the trees, the rocks, the moon, the stars, they are given a type of spiritual consciousness, if you will. And so what happens is now, um, I guess I should say that the way this practically plays out in outdoor education is you have a ton of earth-centric rituals. You have a ton of animism is everywhere. And animism, by the way, is just ascribing a soul or a spirit or a divine essence to non-human entities like animals and rocks and whatever else. So you have animism everywhere, and all of this just amounts to a deification of nature. And what happens then is that you go out in nature not to experience creation and experience the creator. Now nature becomes something that is there to be worshiped.
Mm.
And biblically speaking, this is exactly what Paul was describing in Romans 1, verse 25, right? It's the great exchange of worship of the creator to now worship of the creation.
Mhm.
And, we can go
Yeah.
back to Psalm 19 even, that the heavens declare the glory of what? Or of who?
Uh,
Of God, not their own glory. The sky above proclaims his
it's
handiwork, not
and
its own handiwork. And so pantheism stops at creation and ascribes the divinity to creation. And that
mm,
wreaks havoc in outdoor education. And it is
mm,
everywhere. It is everywhere. And it has many different shapes and forms. Honestly, within pantheism, there's probably 5, 10, 15 other nuances that we could talk about, but broadly speaking, that is a prevailing worldview. And then there's secular environmentalism, which has some similarities, but is its own thing. And the argument in secular environmentalism is that creation has value for its own sake. And not just that, it's independent of a creator. Nature is valuable independent of a creator. And it's fascinating because under this worldview, humanity is then viewed through this lens of being an intruder on Earth, or even in some circles, a parasite on Earth. And while they might not frame it this way, all of these worldviews have a doctrine of salvation. All of these
Mm.
worldviews are identifying something wrong, they're presenting the solution. And in secular environmentalism, it's very clear sustainability now becomes salvation, right?
Mm. Mm.
Humanity is fundamentally harmful. We don't see humanity as a God appointed steward. They're fundamentally harmful. Therefore, salvation is about finding ecological balance, about reducing your footprint on Earth.
Getting rid of
That's secular.
Sneeville, right?
Say again?
Oh, I just made a Dr. Seuss joke. Getting rid of
Oh,
Sneeville, Lorax.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And, again, we can evaluate this biblically. This is just a misunderstanding of Genesis 1:26 through 28, what stewardship actually looks like. Even
Yeah.
Genesis 2:15 comes into play. But the passage that probably is most needed to think about this one is Psalm 24, right? That
Mm.
the whole world is the Lord's and the fullness thereof.
Yeah.
Everything therein belongs to the Lord. And so there's a divine ownership element that is completely eliminated in secular environmentalism, which is tragic.
Mm.
So you have, practically again in outdoor education, a lot of radical preservationism, things like that come into play. And then there's another one that again, there are some similarities, but it's its own thing. And you see this a lot, saw it a lot in Washington, and that's New Age spirituality, which, as you know, has
Mm.
made massive inroads over the last few decades,
Right.
certainly in an outdoor context as well. And what New Age spirituality is going to argue is that going out into nature really is a way of achieving a higher consciousness, of experiencing a spiritual awakening, right? It's
Mm.
this, it's there's so much here, but the new age spirituality is now going to try to integrate things like uh, astrology, right? Energy healing, crystal healing, moon ceremonies. I've been around all that stuff, and it is
Wow.
rampant in outdoor education, unfortunately. And
Mm.
what happens is you end up leading people away from the one true and living God. You lead people away from biblical truth into occult practices, which the Bible expressly forbids. Think
Right.
about what Israel was warned of in Deuteronomy 4:19. Beware lest you're looking up at the stars, looking up at the sun and the moon, and you bow down to them and you serve them rather than the one who put them there, rather than the one who made them. So again, it's kind of that pantheistic outlook, but it's its own thing. It's its own nuanced version of occultism. And you could essentially summarize these first three worldviews as worship of creation, right? There's a
Mm.
heavy emphasis on worship of creation. The buck stops there in some way, shape, or form. The last two, especially this next one, now shifts more towards worship of self. And so the fourth one I would categorize as the prepper survivalist mentality, which again is very common. And this is a fascinating one. This is a fear-driven, um, it's there's a stress on individualism and self-preservation, probably is the key word there, self-preservation. It's all about what you can do to muster up your own strength, your own skills to survive whatever comes your way. It's often rooted in a distrust of other people, distrust of God's provision, perhaps worst of all. And so
Mm.
you get this bunker mentality, this lone wolf mentality, instead of this spirit of charity and community and dependence on the Lord. All of that comes out here. And, this is just, again, um, go back to Matthew 6, right? God is the
Yeah.
ultimate provider. God is the ultimate provider. So there's a lot to talk about there. Then the last one is, maybe we could talk more about the prepper one later, but the last one
Yeah.
is um, probably a better title for this, but I just consider it romantic, or what did I say? Romanticized primitivism is what I call it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where primitive living is seen as the purest uh, form of human existence, essentially. And this might not warrant its own category, but I think it does. And if you spend enough time in different circles, there is a whole movement where we want to do away with advancement outright. So
Mm-hmm.
technological advancement, cultural progression, all of that is deemed as not just unnecessary but bad. We need to get back to everything natural, everything primitive. So all sorts of innovation is deemed unhelpful, negative, hurtful to society. We have to go back to grassroots primitivism. And again, it's flawed. It's deeply
Right.
flawed. Human innovation is a God-given gift,
Mm-hmm.
stewarding the earth, making
Right.
advancements. Look all the
Right.
way back in Genesis 4, we see human innovation.
Totally.
We need to be working Proverbs 12:11. There are so many passages we can discuss, but basically those five make up the core of outdoor education as it now stands. There's pantheism, secular environmentalism, new age spirituality, survivalist slash prepper mentalities, and romanticized primitivism.